Russian President Vladimir Putin is once again raising the specter of nuclear weapons. Putin says Russia could use them in response to threats. Let's bring in CNN contributor and former Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty. She's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Jill, good to have you. The deployment of these tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. Secretary Blinken says that the U.S. sees no evidence that or any indication that the Russians intend to use them. So what is the message Putin's trying to send by simply moving them to Belarus?
Well, he's been doing this step by step. So remember back in March, they began to talk about this. We will be putting tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Then they said, but we have to build the shelters for them, the buildings for them. Then that took another month. So this is eking out, slowly. The message is, of course, that the West and NATO and Ukraine should be very afraid that Russia will use nuclear weapons. And it's a tactic that, is less and less effective, I think, because the assessment by the United States really is that Putin does not want to start a nuclear war. That said, you can't eliminate the possibility that they might use tactical nuclear weapons. So, looking at this speech by President Putin, it was actually a speech and then kind of a Q&A with an analyst, you really have to, I think, interpret him in the way he has to be interpreted, which is, in my opinion, he's kind of like the arsonist, the pyromaniac who starts a fire and then puts out his own fire. So he raises the ante saying, well, we could use nuclear weapons, the big ones, if necessary to protect Russia. However, there's no need. So this is all, he doesn't say anything just for the fun of it. I think this is definitely his message to frighten the West.
And we should remember, all of this is his fire, right? The war is his fire that he started back in February of last year. So let me ask you about, bring in a bit of Fred's reporting. As we're seeing that the Ukrainians are claiming some advances in this counteroffensive that has been talked up for so many months now, but it's not overwhelming the Russians. Putin says that it has no chance. Is that at all part of this nuclear weapon conversation, even including the context you added about his kind of forecasting these moves over the last several months?
Yes, I think you're right that there are probably two ways that he's using this. Number one, they're not winning, we are, or at least, we, Russia, he is claiming, is holding off the Ukrainians. And then from the nuclear perspective, he's saying, we've got these weapons, but we really don't need to use them. So because, we're not losing the war. So I think, again, he's using it for a couple of different reasons. And don't forget that some of this is talking to his own people. One phrase that he used in that Q&A with the expert was a pretty off-color Russian expression, which I guess I could use on air, but it's basically, screw them. And it was that strong. He used it. And that reminded me of back in the Chechen War, he used a pretty obscene description for what he was going to do to terrorists. That was very popular in the beginning of early Putin. So when he uses these tough guy phrases, kind of off color, tough, he's also sending a message to his people that I'm not going to be pushed around. I am in control. And don't forget, the war is not going the way he expected. And there is more criticism of how he's been conducting the war domestically.
I appreciate your concern of the audience and screw them, but I think they're okay with that. That wasn't too offensive at this hour. Let me talk now. Putin also said of the Leopard tanks and all of the weapons that are coming in to support Ukraine broadly, and of course during this counteroffensive, he said if they are based abroad but used in fighting, we'll see how to hit them and where we can hit those means that are used against us in fighting. You pointed out that Putin does not want a nuclear war. He also doesn't want a war with NATO. Is this more bluster? Is there any scenario in which you can envision Russian troops hitting assets based in Poland, in Germany, in other countries that are allocated for Ukraine?
This was, to me, the most concerning thing that he said. nukes are serious, but this really was, because what he was saying, I think could, and I looked at what he said in Russian, it could apply to the tanks, or it could apply to F-16s and other fighter jets that are going into Ukraine or will go into Ukraine. So if he is saying, for instance, that there are fighter jets in Poland or in the Baltics or someplace, a NATO country, and he's saying that he might, and he was very unclear. He said, we will see what we will do. But that is a threat that he would attack a NATO country to destroy those planes. That's very serious, because that does start a war. So again, he's pushing the envelope. He's hinting. He's not precise in what he's saying, but it's another scare tactic. Don't try this, otherwise I could come. And he used the phrase, the F-16s can burn too, just like the tanks. So again, we're upping the ante.